So relatively speaking, some big news today. 2000 point armies will be having 12 command points. Intercessors will be going up to 20 points along with many other units. And we've got a ton of interesting details about the new missions. Let's see what we've got then. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop, and we've been covering the 9th edition news as it's been coming out over the past few weeks. Today we'll be discussing the latest Warhammer community article, where they've given us a pretty meaningful amount of information as to how match play is going to work. In this video we'll talk about the command points first, then go on to the missions, and then talk about the points rises, including the 20-point intercessors. So first of all, they've provided us with this handy chart. They've told us officially the 4 different sizes of game, which they had already mentioned in passing, but it's good to know the exact points cost that they'll be starting with, and the starting command points for each army. Combat Patrol is 500 points and will be 3 command points, Incursion is 1000 points and will be 6, Strike Force is 2k and that will be 12, and Onslaught is points limit 3000 and up to 18. My first impression is that this seems about right to me. Command points seem like they're going to be a lot more freely available in this coming edition, at least for the majority of armies. At 2000 point level, 12 command points seems like it's going to be enough to put down a few interesting tricks and abilities pre-game, such as putting units in deployment, buying in relics and things, and activate a decent amount of powerful stratagems right from turn 1. As we heard previously, command points are going to be generated in some way in this new command phase in the game, which heavily implies that players are going to be receiving at least 1 command point a turn, or 1 command point a battle round. Maybe you'll have to roll for it or something, we don't know. But the main thing is that it sounds like this command point limit won't just be the amount that you have throughout the whole game, and people will be acquiring more throughout the game as it goes on, it seems. I think for the majority of armies this will be a buff, though for a select few it won't be particularly helpful, particularly things like Orcs or Genestealer Cults or Guard, who typically be running around with 3 battalions anyway, and racking up 18 command points right from the start. Even if we did take it as a relatively conservative estimate, say we're thinking that we're going to be generating 1 command point each battle round, then that should still add up to around about 18 over the course of the game, so I don't think that these armies will particularly lose out. I think it's more an issue of the other armies will have gained a bit of a leg up compared with them. Even for those armies though, not having to take 3 battalions in an army might allow a little bit more flexibility in list building, and maybe not needing to take quite as many troops or HQs. For me this at least seems fairly generous, although bear in mind that they might be a little bit more stretched than normal, as it sounds like there's going to be some sort of tax for taking allies with command points and things, although it might be a small tax for all we know. Next they've gone on a little bit to tell us a bit about the new missions. In particular, the new missions are going to be having secondary objectives that each player can pick. This seems to be very similar to the ITC format of doing things, except the exact secondaries that they're coming out with seem to be quite different to the ITC ones. Basically it sounds like in these new missions they'll have a primary objective where you can rack up victory points in the main mission, and then each player will be able to determine a number of secondary objectives, although it hasn't told us how many we can choose from as of yet. I suspect that we'll be able to at least pick 2 secondary objectives, maybe even 3, depending on what the game is. The secondary objectives are going to be one of a few different lists, of which we know that there's at least 5 different lists of these secondaries, unlike the ITC which has 2, and there'll also be one in most missions I believe, where you can pick that one instead of one of your secondary choices. Again, much like ITC, there's going to be a cap on how many secondary objective points you can score. You can score no more than 15 victory points for each secondary objective that you select during the mission. So just say for example, if you picked one where you scored 3 victory points for every character that was destroyed, you couldn't get like 30 victory points for killing 10 characters. If your opponent had an excessive amount, it will be capped at 15. They discussed objectives such as Purge the Enemy, Manoeuvring and completing Psychic Rituals, which we'll go on to in a second, and you can only choose 1 from each category. So these are some of the secondaries that we have access to then. They've chosen to preview 5, and imagine that there's probably 1 from each category, although for all we know there could be more. I think that typically these are quite good game design, just because it means that you're not very likely to be stuck with an objective that your army can't do, with so much choice to choose from. So it's looking like there's a lot of freedom for being able to rack up the victory points. I'd be amazed if there weren't some that are significantly stronger than others. In ITC, picking secondaries is a significant part of the tactics, and I think that it will be a strategic decision to be made as to which of these secondaries to go with at the start of a game. You're going to have to weigh it up based on the table, your opponent's army, and your own army's capabilities. The ones that we've got previewed are Purge the Enemy one called Assassinate. That one's 3 victory points for each character destroyed, nice and simple. There's a no mercy, no respite one called Thin Their Ranks, where you keep a tally of how many models were destroyed, and apparently you add 10 to the tally, presumably if it was a creature or monster over 10 wounds or something like that. They haven't shown the entire thing off, and we don't know exactly how many points you score from it, but basically this is going to be victory points depending on how many enemy models that you kill, so will be a good buy-in against things like hordes. Next we have Shadow Operations, with an objective called Investigate Sites, which sounds like it's going to be infantry units visiting objectives in some way. There's Battlefield Supremacy, which is Engage on all fronts, which is 2 victory points at the end of your turn if you have 1 or more units wholly within 3 different table quarters. And there's an entire category called Warpcraft, which is interesting seeing as not all races have psychers. It sounds like you can rack up some points for casting a specific psychic power. In this one it sounds like it's Mental Interrogation, which implies to me that you might be needing to get your psychic close to an enemy character and then rip some information out of their mind with a low warp charge spell. From a tactics and strategy point of view, I think that this is really quite a cool development. It's going to add a lot of depth and interest to the match play version of the game, and I think that once people get used to using these, it's going to lead to a bit of a deeper game experience in the game of Warhammer 40k. On the other hand though, I can see that while we're trying to adopt these, this certainly isn't going to make missions any easier to do for newer players. There's definitely going to be a lot more bookkeeping involved, keeping track of many different objectives all running at the same time, all scoring different amounts of points, and trying to remember all of them over the course of the game. I think you're definitely going to be needing a pen and paper on standby for a game of 40k now. These just aren't the sort of objectives that you can just happily add up in your head. I guess this is always going to be a trade-off. Generally more complexity and choice is going to come with a bit more of a bookkeeping and mental burden. Personally, I'm a big fan. I'm quite used to playing ITC style missions, and this doesn't seem all that different, so I can imagine that not everyone will be a fan of this one. For me though, I wouldn't write anything off or write anything in until we've actually seen the rules though, and at least given the missions a try to be fair to them. Next up, Games Workshop has shown off an example mission. This is a new version of the 4 Pillars, which is a Strike Force mission, so one aimed at the 2,000 point bracket. The 4 Pillars is a mission name that we've seen plenty of times before. It's very much got an updated and revamped version for the new game. Interestingly, the deployment is locked. You're going to be playing on the sort of table quartery one, where you can't deploy within a certain range of the centre of the battlefield. And the objectives are also fixed as well, so no player choice in that one. Personally, I'm fine with fixed objectives. I'm not really the biggest fan of the pre-game objective mini-game of trying to gain an edge over your opponent when setting up objectives, which you can certainly do. This one has a primary objective and also a secondary objective that you can select instead of one of those other secondaries that we mentioned. The primary objective has 3 different parts, which you can score 0 to 15 victory points a turn for. Basically you get 5 points if you control an objective marker, another 5 if you control 2, and another 5 if you control more than your opponent. I think those added together will give a pretty realistic idea of who's dominating the battlefield. I remember in previous versions of the mission it was troops only that could score these objectives, which just felt a little bit weird to me. I'm really not a big fan of making objectives only scoreable by one unit type, just because it rewards some armies so much more than others. I just think it's a bit of a strange situation where you say that that unit can't arbitrarily score that objective, because while being very similar infantry, they can't score the objective because they're technically not troops. I just think that missions shouldn't generally penalise one type of army over another, wherever possible. That secondary objective is called Siphon Power, and it's sort of a defend type objective where you park units on the objectives, and if they survive till the following turn, then you get a number of victory points as based on the charts on the right there, with more victory points depending on how many of these you can do it in each given turn. I guess we'll have to weigh that one up against the full list of secondary objectives when we get them. Overall, I really like the look of this mission. It looks like it's genuinely going to reward the people who are controlling the battlefield more, with the secondary objectives giving you decent rewards if you're just all about killing the enemy army rather than holding things as well. Again though, I think that you are going to need to be keeping a pen and paper on standby to add up the points, because you need to remember exactly how many victory points you scored per turn, and the same for those slightly weird numbers on the secondary. So again, a little bit more bookkeeping, but I think that it's a more deep and interesting mission as a result. Finally, they've told us that points are going to be raised across the board in Warhammer 40k, and previewed a couple of the units that are going up, including Intercessors and Chaos Cultists. Now I really would try not to misunderstand this. This doesn't mean that those units are going to be any worse. I think that this is aimed to be a general points rise for the entirety of the game. And it's not that those 2 units are just being singled out. I think it's been at least relatively apparent over the course of 8th edition that Games Workshop tends to prefer rebalancing things by repeatedly dropping units points, as it's a lot more of a feel-good factor to have your weaker units buffed than have your stronger, hardest hitting units nerfed. This is fairly okay as a balance approach. I did talk about it in another video, but it comes with a few problems, particularly as you get sort of point inflation in games. What was a 2,000 point army will become a larger and larger amount of models just because all of the models are repeatedly getting cheaper, so you need more of them. I think that this is actually really quite a decent way of providing a bit of a counterbalance to that. If you do it for the entire game all at once in the points adjustments, you could just basically take every single unit in the game and increase the points cost by a small percentage and try and keep it relatively similar. Also, if everything in the game generally has slightly higher points cost, that means that there's a little bit more scope for tweaking the points cost of individual units, as it's less of a big deal if one unit goes up or down 1 point. It means that you can be a little bit more fine-tuned about things, rather than having 1 point be quite a big difference to whether or not a unit's viable. Unfortunately, as we can see in Games Workshop's very example here, it's likely to have the biggest impact on lower cost models, things like Guardsmen, Gretchen, or unfortunately Chaos Cultists. The thing is, by going up by just 1 point, all these units will have quite a big percentage increase. Say if Gretchen went up a point from 3 points to 4 points, and that would actually be a whopping 33% points hike, compared with the Intercessors. They've gone up from 17 to 20 here, which is only a 17% points hike, so the Intercessors seem to have come out quite well. If we look at these poor Chaos Cultists though, they appear to have gone up 2 points per model rather than 1 point, jumping from 4 points to 6. I'm not sure what the thinking behind this was, but going from 6 points from 4 points is a 50% increase in the unit's cost. So out of this particular points change, the Chaos Cultists appear to have come off far worse than the Intercessors have, at least at first glance. It's going to be really quite a big deal to Chaos lists, seeing as they can only get 60-point Cultist squads if they need to fill out formations now, or just the price of their chaff screens has just gone absolutely through the roof. Honestly, this doesn't look very good for the Chaos Cultists to me, though we will have to wait for the rest of 9th edition. For all we know, they will be getting some significant advantages just from the way that the game works, although at the moment it doesn't seem massively likely. This one does have me just a bit worried for other Horde type units, particularly Imperial Guard, as if they take a similar points hit, then infantry squads are just going to be far worse in 9th than they were in 8th. It really does have the potential to turn quite a lot of the game right on its head, and change a lot of the things that are good for things that are less good. To be honest, I really do like the idea of this on the whole. Balancing out the points inflation and getting a bit more granularity in the game is okay, but I hope they've just managed to do it on a percentage-based level, rather than literally just adding like a few points to each unit. The Chaos Cultist versus Intercessor squad change just really doesn't seem very intelligent in my eyes, so I hope this isn't too representative of the rest of the game. At the end, they also mentioned that an app will be able to help with building army lists right from day one. Previously, they've seemed to imply that you only get the points costs and the army details if you actually buy the army book, so I'm not honestly sure whether or not that's going to be happening or not for something that's useful, unless you fork out for the codexes on a digital version. It will be interesting if they have the new points costs available in the app. Maybe if you buy the 9th rulebook, then you get access to them. I guess we can only wait and see. It would certainly be a big boon to all these points cost shifts if they do release points costs on the app and they're freely available, or at least available if you happen to have got the 9th edition rulebook. So let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Bit of a mixed barrel this one. I really like all of the mission changes myself, but I can see how they might not be the most inspiring thing for slightly newer players. And in general, I really like the idea of the points cost changes, but I just hope that they've managed to do them in a fairly sensible way. I do feel a bit sorry for all of the Chaos Cultists out there right now. We'll certainly be continuing to cover the 9th edition news as it comes out, and I will be reviewing everything that I can on the channel, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to hear more. If you've been enjoying the videos recently and would like to support the channel, I'd just like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which is down in the video description below. Making all of these videos does take a fair bit of time, and it's only possible to do so with the help of the Patreons on Patreon. If you are interested in supporting, then as well as keeping new videos coming, patrons also get to see videos early, get to vote on regular polls for what sort of things comes next on the channel, and there's regular prize draws where I post out miniatures to someone wherever they are in the world. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the description below, and a big thank you to all of my current patrons for making this channel possible. In any case, a big thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.